Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi, and welcome to Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm Marie Stella, your host from Melbourne, Australia. Let's start the show. Welcome back to Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast. Work from home arrangements are such a norm these days, which is great because it means we get to spend more time with our pets, kids, and personal belongings, hobbies. But it also means that part of the home has to be optimized for working long hours, which is something most of us probably haven't considered before the pandemic. So today we're speaking to interior architect Iva Durakovic. Did I say that right?
You did, Durakovic. Yep.
Thank you so much for advice on creating a work environment at home that's conducive and, better yet, sustainable. Hi, Eva. How are you going?
Not bad. Are we?
Fine, thank you. Thank you so much for guiding me through how to pronounce your name.
It's okay. Get it all the time.
I really appreciate it. Now, in your line of work, what is the most common problem your clients come to you with?
To me, so I used to be kind of client-facing, and now I'm at the university and I teach. So it's been an interesting kind of flip of perspectives. But yeah, clients, typically it would be, so they're wanting workplace design. So their usual problem is, how do we maximize the use of this space that we have? How do we optimize it to get the best out of our people? And that's typically, the briefs, and then we go through all sorts of kind of stakeholder engagement processes to sort of figure out what it is that really makes them tick, and then you kind of come up with a design solution for that. So it's fun because there's no one size kind of fits all. But now my clients, my students, are coming to me saying, how do I solve this design problem? So
that actually was what I was going to ask about next. You mentioned this switch from having clients to teaching students. So what was that switch like, and what kind of design problems are they coming to you with now?
The students, yeah. So the switch was great. I think very conscious in the sense that I'd spent quite a long time, in industry. And then I thought, I really want to explore some ideas a bit further in depth, which you don't necessarily get the time or space to do on a project in industry. And so when the opportunity came up to go back to the same institution that I studied at, actually, same program, that's when I sort of jumped. So, the students, we give them the design problems. And those problems are very much based on real world issues that are happening at the moment. So unsurprisingly, I give them a workplace design brief, and it is very much now focused around how do you solve for hybrid? How do you entice people to still use this space? What is the purpose of that workplace if we're working from anywhere at the moment? But also bigger picture problems, across sort of the society, and obviously the environment and the climate is a massive one. So sort of instilling in them sustainable design practices and
And what's the most creative solution you've seen a student come up with?
Was recently, actually. It was a workplace where the acoustics were controlled by live beehives.
Oh, wow. How does that work?
It was really fascinating. And she'd sort of gone through all this extensive research into different types of bees and the kind of frequencies that an active hive would create as a means to effectively providing white noise, which is what, many offices do have to kind of, if it's too silent, it's very disturbing to be in a very quiet office. So they often inject white noise, and that balances out acoustics. So yeah, her whole design solution was around creating these, I suppose, houses or structures that could house bees in the environment for different activities to take place. It was fascinating.
That is so interesting to me. And how easy or difficult is it to implement it in reality?
This one, you would need to jump through a lot of risk hoops in terms of OH&S on that one.
Yeah.
But I think if you sort of took the crux of that idea, certainly there would be ways to do something similar. But I think underlining all of that was this idea of actually cohabiting with nature, which we should get much better at doing.
That is such a good idea. And it reminds me of this resort that's meant to be built in Singapore sometime this year, where the hotel is just enveloped in nature. It's basically one with nature, and they have these like room pods, and it's just shrouded in nature essentially, and you can barely tell apart. It looks like a gigantic treehouse almost. You walk out of the balcony and you are just shrouded in the rainforest, which is incredible. So that's really interesting, and I love to hear more about workplace solutions. But before we get started, we'd like to get to know you better. This is Have You Met Eva? And my first question for you is, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Garden.
Yeah. How much time do you spend gardening?
Sorry?
Yeah. How much time do you spend gardening?
Pretty much a lot. All our weekends. We live on quite a large property, so in order to keep the garden from enveloping us, we need to be out there a lot. But yeah, it's great. I do. I enjoy being outdoors.
Yeah. I've always been intrigued by gardening and plants and keeping them at home, but like it sounds like a lot of work. So when did you start gardening, and how long, like what was the process like?
I think it sort of crept up slowly. It sort of came from food and an interest in trying to grow food. I don't know, teenage years maybe. And so, yeah, I went from basically killing all of my little seedlings because I'd sown lots of seeds in a little pot and they all came up really thick. And so I didn't want to waste any. And I like separated them all out individually, not realizing that in that process I would have destroyed their fragile root systems. From that failure, it's progressed from there. But yeah, just sort of slowly, and then having a little patch. And then when we finally bought our house, I fell in love with the garden. So.
And do you have a favorite spot in the garden or a favorite feature in the garden?
It's a tough one. Yes, I do, but I have many. So
fair enough.
There's many little outlooks, but probably the vegetable garden would be where I...
Vegetable garden. What kind of vegetables do you keep?
We try to grow everything.
Oh, wow. A jack of all trades. Yeah.
We try as well. I mean, if you've got the space, why not? But I think, we're in the Blue Mountains, so it's quite a cold climate. So obviously... certain things like capsicums and eggplants don't love it so much, and so we have to go towards more the cold-loving leafy greens and whatever they seem to do quite well, and then the animals might get to them. So it's a fun journey.
Which are the most successful harvests so far?
Tomatoes, interestingly. But green tomatoes, because they have an abundance of fruit, but by the time the heat of the season has run out, they haven't ripened yet. So I've made kilos and kilos of green tomato chutney.
Whoa, kilos and kilos. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's so much. My little city rat brain cannot comprehend kilos and kilos of green tomato chutney. That sounds amazing.
Yeah. It's a different life.
Yeah, for sure. Now, what kind of media do you like to consume? Books, films, TV shows?
Since having a child, TV shows are most feasible. I would say yes to all of the above. But look, I used to love live performances in particular, whether that be music or theatre. In that sense, movies, of course. But it's been a while since we got out to the cinema.
Yeah. Is there a live performance that you think about the most?
Oh, yeah. I mean, classical music was my thing, always my thing. So, I've been to some great ones. Probably the highlight was seeing Martha Argerich. So she's an Argentinian pianist. Actually seeing her live, she was always my idol in the piano world. And I saw her in Lugano, actually, in Switzerland.
That must have been so gratifying.
Yeah.
And as for TV shows, now that you're watching more of them with your kids, are there any that, surprised you as an adult watching a children's TV show? Being
there's heaps of favourites. Yeah. I mean, I love and hate Bluey. I say hate because it gives every parent guilt because you can't play that much with your child. Or at least I can't. There's realities of life to go in there, but I think it's a fantastic show. But there's quite a lot that are just they're creative, and from a visual perspective, their graphics are really interesting. But and then the music and the storyline, I don't know, they're just that they tell stories really well. So you could rattle off a whole bunch.
What are some of the runner-ups to Bluey?
Runner-ups. Well, I quite like Ben and Holly. Ben and Holly's Little Kingdom. That's quite cute. And then there's one from New Zealand. Oh gosh, the name's letting me out. It's like two little dinosaur friends. It's really cute.
That sounds
it'll
adorable.
Come to me halfway through.
Yeah, love dinosaurs. I always wondered what it'd be like to
Kiri
go back
and
in
Lou.
time and Kieran and Lou.
Yeah.
I've never heard of it. I don't have a child,
It's
so
very
it
cute.
would be surprising if I've heard of it. Thank you for sharing that with us. I feel like we got to know you a bit better. You seem like such a loving parent, and lover of classical music. Such a green thumb as well, so that's really interesting. Now we're moving on to our interview section, and the first question we like to ask is something that we ask all of our guests, just to set the baseline. How would you define personal development?
Me, personally, I think growth is probably the first word that comes to mind, and introspection. Because for me, it's, there are so many different things you could define as personal development. Essentially, it's getting better at something about yourself, but learning through that process. And I think, for me, it's very much focused on turning inward and almost simplifying. I know it seems counterintuitive, like you're growing, so there should be more, or an abundance or more experience or skill in something. But in many ways, I think through deeper understanding, a lot of things become simplified, and then through that growth, you're actually able to, apply that kind of stability and maybe fulfillment to a lot of other factors in your life. So it's like a grounding for me, really.
Yeah. And what are some of the challenges that you think would arise in trying to be self-reflective and, have that introspection when pursuing that personal development?
I think there's a few. Firstly, it's very hard to be still, and it's not for everyone. So I think that's the other challenge. It's kind of, as I said before, there's many different ways to define it, and what I would consider satisfying personal development, or what I would enjoy trying to pursue, somebody else might not. But I think in our life generally today, it is quite hard to be still. And I think it's also because we get bombarded with so much motivational stuff. And, it's almost like the decision-making process of what we're consuming has been completely taken away from us. You just get you like this, so therefore you must like this as well. So that stillness to sort of turn in and go, no, what do I want is getting harder and harder. Not just because it's hard to find the time. So yeah, in that sense, I think it's a time factor, but also being ready. That might be a challenge. Not everybody wants to engage in growth. Sometimes you just need to get through, and that's fine as well. But I think probably the other big challenge is just getting frustrated with the process. I think it is a process and it's not linear. And it's something I hammer into my design students. And we keep saying, just trust the process, because they get frustrated that they're not solving the problem. And even though you sort of say, well, it's not, it's cyclical, it's convoluted, you might take 3 steps backwards and 2 forward. But you need to trust the process. And I think that's probably hard to do at certain times.
Yeah. What you said about trusting the process reminds me a lot about this interior design YouTuber, Mr. Kate. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she does a lot of home renos for other people, and she takes videos of them, she documents them, and she always says it's always going to look worse before it gets better. So just hang in there, push through. It will look worse before it gets better. So that just reminds me of that, how the process doesn't, is not linear. But in terms of home environments, how would you define a sustainable work environment? What qualifies as a sustainable work environment?
A sustainable work environment. So I think we need to also just look at that word sustain, or sustainable, and sustainability as well, because different people might jump to different angles on it. Yeah. But I think it's got sort of 3 core components, and I call it 3 Ps. There's the people, or the wellbeing side of things, sort of sustained existence. There's the place in terms of the physical environment itself, but then there's also the environmental, the planet side of sustainability. So when we say sustainable home work environment, I think it can touch on all, and it should touch on all. But I think it's primarily around our physical health and our psychological health towards sort of being able to sustain productivity and performance. I think that's kind of a broader sort of definition. So, a sustainable home work environment will enable that to happen.
Yeah.
And then it can do that through many, many, many ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Leading up to this episode, I was actually thinking sustainable. I wonder in what sense. I wonder what she's going to talk about, because sustainable has so many different meanings in various contexts. So I'm glad that you're bringing up all 3 contexts. I feel like a lot of them are they all have their place. It depends on what your priorities are, I guess. And how do you think a home environment or a sustainable work environment contributes to our personal development?
So, again, it allows us to be effective in a positive way. So it can hinder as well. But it's about enabling us to be effective. So enabling us to do our best work when we're there. I think it's also from a mental point of view, it's, I suppose in that context, it should be a supportive, calming kind of environment rather than a distracting one that sort of hinders. It should also be safe for us physically from a kind of, ergonomic and other, I suppose also psychological safety comes into this as well. Because I think something that certainly emerged from the pandemic is that not everybody has the ability or has a healthy home environment in which to create a workspace, and it's actually better for them to not be there. So that's sort of a big part of it. But yeah, sorry, your question was, what's the relationship?
Yes.
Of a home to personal development?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it really is around that idea of supporting wellbeing and effectiveness. And I link it back to, it's also our motivation. So if you sort of think about like Maslow's work and the hierarchy of basic human needs, you know, the core level is kind of like a roof over our head that's not going to crash on top of me. Translated to a home work environment, you know, it's a safe place to sit and work that's not going to give me back problems or anything like that, or where I'm not in danger. But also as we sort of move through, it effectively, if it is a successful or sustainable environment, it's going to support my motivation to keep doing and to keep growing and to keep engaging with work in a very productive sort of sense. So
yeah. And what are the key factors that people should consider when designing their own sustainable work environments?
Oh, there's lots. I think another big topic that I sort of want to introduce here is this idea of everyone's got their own identity, and a lot of the research work that I do or have done recently relates to, so again, the pandemic really brought together our other identities and our work identities. And some people are the same, some people are not. Some people have a very distinct professional identity, and it is a unique aspect of us as a whole self. Now, in the home, the two are exposed and together. So I am sitting in my home office, you know, right now, which happens to also be, you know, in part of another living area in the house. So therefore, you've got a window into the other side of my identity, which is not necessarily related to work. But I think to create, you know, the things that people should think about is become more cognizant of how their home environment relates to and supports or otherwise their actual identity as a person, and that it's going to be different for everybody. It's going to be more or less important for everybody, but I think as human beings, everyone has this need and mechanism of expressing and identifying with the spaces that they occupy.
Yeah, for sure.
And you're never going to be able to sort of break that. So, you know, you can do it through colour and styling and sort of, you know, other things, but you don't have to sort of give it a particular aesthetic as long as you feel in alignment with it. So then, you know, I suppose if you're asking me what are the kind of elements that we can consider in terms of the design, is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
You know, firstly, I think the non-negotiables would be kind of the desk or the surface at which you're sort of working. So if you're wanting to sustain a long work day, you're not going to be at the kitchen bench. You might be there for some of the time. But to sort of meet that basic need, as I said before, you need to have a desk at which you can sit for 8 hours, where you're, you know, in a proper chair, where the ergonomics are set up, where you've got a proper screen to look at, where you're not cranking your neck, and those sorts of things. Otherwise, you can mix it up as well. So there's nothing to say that you have to be in the same spot all the time. And I think with work, what we're, I suppose, discovering, but maybe not so much aware of, or what frightens a lot of managers and organizations in many ways, is this idea that, you know, we all know that we're not going to do every type of task in the same type of setting. And I think the first step would be starting to build an awareness of that within yourself. So because I think about this all the time, I'm hyper aware. Some people might not be. So it's sort of starting to notice what you do best in a certain spot. And if sitting at the kitchen bench makes you super efficient at getting through all the admin or whatever it might be, or maybe that's the place where you have your best ideas, then that is actually an appropriate workspace for that type of task. There's nothing to say that that can't be included in your homework environment. If, you write your best or do your best sort of deep thinking, sitting at a desk, then fine. If you do it sitting on a couch, that's fine. Just don't do it for 8 hours a day. Sort of thing. So don't be afraid to sort of mix it up.
Yeah. That's really interesting that you pointed that out, because I actually have been reflecting as you were elaborating on all of this that I do spend a lot of time on my couch. It's just the way that I get up in the morning, and I feel like having a cup of coffee on the couch is the best way to start my day, but it's probably not the best way to continue working throughout the day. So good advice, point taken. I will probably switch it up midway through the day, switch to my desk. And because I actually have a desk, I just, for some reason, can't bring myself to do it, or just think that once I'm on the couch, I should be on the couch for the entire day. But it's not doing my back any favors. I'm not getting any younger. I've turned 25. I'm mid-20s now.
Lucky
so
you.
But I can't afford to sit on the couch for 8 hours anymore with my neck facing downwards. I'm going to need to visit a chiropractor at some point. By that rate. So that's great advice. But I was hoping that you'd elaborate a bit more on the other elements of a sustainable work environment to consider. Yeah.
So let's talk about, I suppose, a physical setup. We've discussed kind of there's the ergonomic and the equipment and those sorts of factors. There is, if we're talking about setting up a full home office at home, and so I think that's the context in which to read these suggestions, then you need to think about your indoor environment quality. And this is a huge topic in a lot of workplace design, so on offices. So we had, the whole sick building syndrome sort of revelation that came through. Oh, my God, poor air quality is making us sick. Wow. Of course it is. Okay, so at home, the beauty is that you actually have a lot of control, full control over your environmental conditions. And so think about the lighting. If you can get natural light into that space, get natural light into that space, because that's going to be to supplement, and you might need to supplement it so that things are properly lit with artificial lighting, but that's, a primary need of, I suppose, human comfort, because we're used to that. Think about the air quality. You ideally should be able to crack a window and not sort of stuck. You're not trying to recreate a corporate office environment, ideally, because they're not sustainable for a long amount of time. They're designed to function in the most optimum way that they can. But even in that sort of setting, we're starting to bring in natural ventilation sort of systems or combinations of the two. So think about the air quality. If it's stuffy, your brain's not going to be oxygenated enough to think properly. So that all kind of matters. And then the acoustics, that's the other big one, which is what we ran away from in the office. So if you can control, and again, not everybody can, ideally you should be able to work in the acoustic conditions that suit you. And I say suit you because it's not necessarily silence. A lot of people that I know, my partner, to concentrate fully, he's the type of person that needs background noise constantly. If it's silent, it completely throws him, whereas I'm the opposite. If I hear, particularly if I hear music, I'm off. I can't focus on the tasks. So just, again, being aware of what the optimal environmental sort of qualities kind of are in there. And then the other big one, which I think starts to feed into, it's gaining a lot of traction now, but it definitely feeds into this idea of humans and our innate kind of comfort, is biophilia. And so by biophilia, I suppose it includes all of that. Natural light, certainly, it feeds into our circadian rhythms. If you are under a very bright, cold, cool, that intense, almost UV artificial light, and you're working at 6 o'clock at night, it's going to affect your ability to sleep and your sort of sleep pattern. So that's really important. And on that, it's also really important to be able to somehow, because as I say here, my office is not in a separate home office room. It's in part of the house. So I've had to establish really clear, they could be little, but transition rituals to transition into work and to transition out of work. And for me, it's just that the computer stays in this room. For other people, it might be going for a walk around the block or whatever it is. And I think through COVID, a lot of us did develop this. It's just about becoming aware of it in that sense. But back to kind of biophilia. So, I've got plants. That's a really simplistic sort of example of what that is. But it's basically anything that mimics and allows us to kind of connect into natural patterns and nature. So having a view is great because you can look out the window and you can calm your mind. If you can't do that, having a picture of something natural or having a natural texture or, natural materials and all those sorts of things. So, biophilia is huge. I could talk for hours on that one. But
yeah, now that you've elaborated on that so in depth, I am just reflecting on my personal work environment at home and realizing that I check none of the boxes. I have no ventilation at home because I have a cat and I don't have screen doors. So I've got to, and I live in an apartment, so I can't really crack open any windows. Sometimes I try to stuff him. Stuff him is just a cruel way of saying it, but I put him in my bedroom and I get the sliding door open to get some ventilation in. But even then I have a separate room for my office and there's no ventilation there. There's a little window on top and there's no natural light. So now that makes sense why sometimes I go crazy working from home and I've got to take a walk around the block. But for people who do have their desks in living spaces at home, are there ways to kind of designate that space solely to working or kind of separate the space, the working space a bit without blocking or closing the space up even more? For example, a rug.
Many things can define a space, and again, it's just up to the person. So, if it is, it's fine if you have to work on a dining table. Work on the dining table, but it could be as simple as just clearing the dining table entirely while you're working. It is just a workspace. When you've finished, clear the computer out and put it somewhere else and make it back to a dining table for everybody to use. So that's just a ritual, and it's more about that mental well-being. And some colleagues of mine, they did a study. It was related to working in our bedrooms through COVID and the impact that had on our sleep. But it's very subconscious. People aren't aware of it, but it's very important to sort of switch off. Look, working at home might not be for you. Go to a cafe. That's also, a workspace. Or you could go to a library, or you could find some other, we'll call it work from home. It's really work from anywhere at the moment. But if you are in the home and in this sort of situation, yes, it could be a rug that is underneath the table and just sort of defines a little square of space. It could be a very subtle sort of, a little bookshelf or a screen, some sort of a screening device that sort of separates that part of the room. You work with what you can, really, because everybody's going to be in a different situation.
Yeah. And for people like me who don't have natural ventilation, what are some other things they can do in order to get the airflow going in their home without relying on air conditioning? Is there even a way to do this?
Look, it depends on your home sort of setup. So if you can secure the pet,
secure the pets. I love how you said that.
It's at risk of jumping off the balcony. You might be able to sort of just crack it a little bit, and create some sort of cross ventilation. So if you are able to even crack the sliding door slightly, and open a high level window, you might find that you're able to actually get a breeze kind of coming through. So particularly if it's high and low, that is a good start for sort of passive design, which will get air moving through the space. If you can keep the window open while you're there, great. It really comes down to the quality of the actual shell within which you're operating, which you can sometimes impact and sometimes you can't.
Right. Yeah.
In your case, maybe some fly screens if you can install them.
I'm renting. I don't know how easy or how much is it to install a fly screen?
Oh gosh. Now you're asking me. I haven't gone there for a long time. I have no idea.
Is it like renter friendly at all, fly screens?
I think your landlord would just have to get something put. It's like an additional door in the track. Yeah.
Well, here's to hoping at some point I'll be able to buy my own home and install fly screens, so I don't have to keep securing my animal. But do you think a standing fan would work with helping with the ventilation, the airflow?
It would move air around, certainly. But if you're not getting fresh air in, then it won't help with the air quality in that sense. So the problem with recycling air is actually just the carbon dioxide level in there. Whereas when you're free breathing, then it's not so bad.
Maybe you can do a mix of both, where like crack open the sliding door just a little bit and then get a standing fan too. But it's also like in an apartment, I want to avoid taking up extra like floor space, you know? So many things to think about. Interior design, Jesus.
But on that, plants will also help the quality of your air because they're a natural filtration system.
That's the other thing. My cat keeps eating plants and he shouldn't be eating them.
His cat's problematic.
Yeah, I know. I've got to secure the animal. I've got to secure my cat.
No. Look, you do what you can, but I think go out, work in the cafe. You know, do your emailing on the couch and then get out of there. I mean, that's an option too.
It is probably for the best with my situation, but hopefully the audience, the people listening, the listeners, will be able to take your advice. Hopefully they don't have stubborn cats like I do. So what are some ways to future-proof the home office to when it comes to keeping it sustainable with the materials and stuff?
Yeah, look, I think, again, you work with what you've got. I suppose one thing that we kind of haven't touched on is the environmental planet side of that sustainability. So, I mean, if you are particularly, and look, your situation is the situation of many, many people, I'm sure, in terms of the building stock that they're living in. And it's a very poor reflection on the quality of a lot of rental sort of properties across the country. And so hopefully there will be, as a result of COVID and all of this, a dramatic improvement in the quality of home living situations. I mean, there's, we saw some people have damp issues, some people you can't heat the place properly in winter, but all of those things impact your comfort. If you're not comfortable in the space in which you're working, you're not going to be able to do your job properly because there'll be other factors, more basic needs that need to be satisfied before you can actually use your cognitive power to its full ability. So in terms of, keeping it sustainable, I guess if you can switch out light globes to be a better colour of light so that you're not maybe, under that kind of very bright sort of morning blue light at 7 o'clock at night, great. If it can be an LED thing, if it can be, a very low wattage, high output sort of situation, then fantastic. And they're not expensive. So these are really cheap, quick sort of solutions without doing any structural changes. In terms of, I suppose, heating systems, if you're not dependent on, if you have the means to be able to be in control of that, there's lots of sort of units which are now based on this kind of reverse cycle sort of heat pump system, which is much lower much more efficient, lower energy use and all the rest of it. So that's all sort of, basics. But I think ultimately to make it sort of sustainable, you need to make it comfortable for you, whatever that means. So also be cognizant of colour. That's another one which maybe doesn't get talked about a lot. It would certainly get talked about in kind of decorating sort of conversations, but the colour of your space will have an impact on your psychology. And colour is used in very direct ways in corporate workplaces. You know, aside from it just being like, oh, the branding is this, so therefore we're going to tap into the organizational brand and use this color. It goes well beyond that. So it's sort of, you know, certain colors will prompt a mindset or a behavioral sort of response. So like yellow is very much a powerful one in decision making. Red is quite a high energy color. If you're sitting in a very red room, you're going to be agitated after a certain amount of time. If you're sitting in a completely white space, it also might be calming initially, but you might go crazy later. So just start to kind of notice how you feel in it and what might need to shift in that sort of stuff, because a lot of people might not even realize that could be the problem. And that's a simple one.
That's really interesting. How would you recommend incorporating or testing out certain colors with the workspace?
I think just, take note of how you feel in there. And then based on that, sort of go, oh, is this making me feel really slow or sluggish? And, you know, you might find that there's too much sort of green or blue in the space. You know, it might just be through, if it's too bland, inject a fruit, I don't know, cushions or a plant or It depends on your aesthetic. Like, honestly, it's about aligning your identity and your preferences to the space in which you're sort of working. Much like, I think, the crux of this sort of idea of, you know, a sustainable homework environment is that it's suitable for the tasks that you're trying to do there. That is the crux of any workplace as well, and good workplace design. So, you know, ABW, if you've heard of that, activity-based working, which was huge on the scene, and then it got poo-pooed, and, you know, there's arguments in both camps about why it's good and why it's bad. And people tend to sort of, you know, congregate in the same spot and they're not doing the right behaviours and whatever. Ultimately, as a philosophy, that boils down to the same thing as what I'm saying here, which is being able to have a space that you can go to that suits the headspace, suits the task, or the workspace, suits the task that you're trying to do. And you move around. Moving is great for you. So even at home, you should be getting up and changing positions or going for a walk or whatever, not sitting there for 8 hours a day. Certainly break the sedentary behaviour. But also it's a mental sort of stimulant. If you can, get a sit-stand desk so you can stand up to do certain things, sit down to do others. So, it just depends on how much you've got to invest and how much you've got to play with. If it's not a lot, then just, you know, find the things that work with what you've got and then find other spaces elsewhere.
That's really interesting. It sounds like there's a lot of trial and error involved in this, and also with just moving positions as well. If you think about it, when you're working from like your company's office, you will be getting up periodically to go and chat with your colleagues or your coworkers to discuss certain things, knock on your boss's door, chat a bit. So you are moving around then. And so it makes sense that you'd have to do that at home as well. But it often slips our mind. So we have to set aside some time to do that. But what would you say are the biggest challenges or limitations when it comes to trying to create this sustainable work environment at home?
I think it's just what you've got to work with, because obviously if, you know, you're renting something, the walls are the colour that they are, the floor is, you know, the space is what it is. It's a challenge that you need to kind of get around. So the amount of space and the type of space that you've got to work with. and then you sort of figure out what's kind of viable. I think the other challenge is also the other people that are in the home. So let's not forget the wider kind of community and psychosocial environment that you're in. So if it is a hugely distracting flatmate, then you're probably better off just forgetting the homework thing and going and working in an office if you've got one. And I think the other challenge is also just to be a little bit disciplined about your habits and behaviours. So as you were sort of saying before, in an office you do, without thinking about it, at the very least get up to get a cup of tea, and you sort of do a lap of the floor, or you go out for lunch or to the kitchen or whatever. At home, you might also do that, but everything is a much closer kind of confine. So inadvertently your step counts down already. So I think it's also just being aware of that and making sure that you leave that work environment in your home, wherever that may be. That, and look, if you can't go walk the dog or the cat or go for a jog around the block or whatever, I don't know, get outside or switch it up in some other way. But I think having, as I said before, those transition kind of rituals. Okay, I'm going into work mode now, and then this is where I stop. Because we all know that with, technology, even when you leave the office, you haven't sort of switched off unless you consciously make that kind of decision, and that's really, really important at home.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you have any last pieces of advice for our listeners to maybe possibly adopt into their sustainable work environment projects if they are embarking on one?
Play, have fun with it. Yeah, I think experiment, and it's something that I wouldn't only say to people in their home environment. It's something that we're definitely trying to do in the corporate environment as well, because we are all working in a very new landscape and world and reality, and no one's figured it out yet. So just, have fun with it and see sort of what works, and switch it up. Yeah. Don't be afraid to change it.
That does sound really fun, and I feel like you've made this so much more approachable. I'd probably think about getting a couple of cacti for my home office too. I'm not in there all the time, so I need to get something that's low maintenance, and just to give me more oxygen, and also because my cat's not allowed in there. There's no way he can get in there. So
and you wouldn't go for a cactus, you'd hope.
Yeah, the plants are better kept in there. I feel that if I keep my cacti outside of my home office, he will actually try to get to it. That is my fear, because he's fearless. He's tried eating my artificial plants too.
That's interesting. So you'll have a vet bill instead. It has been a recurring issue. I'm trying to work with it. Thank you so much for making that so approachable. Now we're moving on to the questions from the audience. And the first question we have is it better to try and replicate our office layout and desk, or should you treat a work from home space as a completely separate entity? You should treat it as a separate entity, as I've said before, if you can, as in a separate designated space. In terms of replicating the office layout, my first response would be, no, you don't have to. However, there are some principles which I probably haven't mentioned that you should stick to in regards to glare and light and screens. So in your office, hopefully the designers have done a good job, and you will never have a desk that is, so if I'm looking at the window, you will never have a desk that has your screen in front of the glass or the glazing, because that's going to strain your eyes really badly from the glare. So you should always be perpendicular to a window. So if this is the wall with a window on it, your desk should be facing that way. Similarly, try not to have your back with a lot of glare behind you, although that's a bit better than the reverse sort of situation. So always go perpendicular to the light. In that sense, you should try and replicate the office layout, but otherwise, go for it. I mean, your desk can be any shape you want. The only other one to be mindful of, though, is also just for your eyes. And this is a basic OH&S kind of setup. So they will ensure this. I suppose with laptops it's different. So you shouldn't, if you're sitting there for a long, long time, you really ideally should have a desktop screen. But make sure that there's enough distance between you and the screen. So it should be probably about an arm's length, but it's about, I think the minimum is 600 millimeters between your face and the screen so that you're not damaging your eyes.
Oh, that's something I've got to fix at home, I think. I think I'm way too close to... I'm learning so much from this episode here. And our second question is, if everyone in the house works from home, how would you go about separating the space?
Okay. It depends on your needs. So you could do a communal office bench approach, and you're then replicating what you would be in an office, so that, you know, again, like if space is an issue, you might be better off, given that you're all happy to work in open plan, you know, having a large central sort of desk that you all kind of share, and then I suppose everybody would have headphones on, and you might need to go elsewhere for a competing kind of Teams, you know, video conferencing meeting. Yeah, otherwise it's probably mostly just about creating little nooks which have visual and acoustic privacy in some way for each of you, because I think the biggest issue I could see is probably distractions from noise and competing kind of conversations going on in there. So, yeah, you could try that approach, or you could sort of try setting down some rules, which is that, you know, certain types of activities need to happen elsewhere, such as go do your video meeting somewhere else, and at home we can, you know, do quieter stuff. That's something you could try.
Yeah, that's really interesting and so helpful, I'm sure. Thank you for answering our audience questions. Now we're moving on to the open mic section, and this is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about, and it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is yours. Take it away.
What about? Well, I am passionate about workplaces, actually. So I'm just going to have the opportunity to spruik a book, which is going to come out, and I think it's relevant and would be an interesting read, because it covers all of the topics of the physical environment as well as the psychological sort of environment of work, and it's called The Handbook of High Performance Workplaces. So whilst it is focused on obviously commercial sort of office design, I think a lot of those principles you could bring into sort of your home office, and particularly there's a whole chapter about biophilic design. There's a whole chapter about my other passion, which is you know, belongingness and identity, and its relationship to space. So yeah, I would spruik that, and we can give you a link to where to buy that from mid-year.
Amazing. We do love book recommendations, so I really appreciate it. It sounds like such an interesting book. Tell us a bit more about biophilic design and how you got so interested in it.
Probably through my love of plants. No, I think it's just through design. It's sort of, I'm passionate about good design, and that doesn't have any aesthetic bearing on it. I think good design is about principles that work, and biophilic design principle is just another layer of this. So there are very spatial ones, but noticing environments that make you feel really good, and then actually the moment at which I realized, oh, hang on, it's because it's got all these principles at play here. Wow, they must actually work. That was the light bulb sort of moment for me. But I think then also on the flip side, kind of noticing and being baffled at how much it's missing from certain spaces where you wouldn't expect it to be, and sort of slowly trying to just educate, because they're very simple things. To put a plant on your desk, that's one step, you know, and it's not just that, but it is one element of which you can do really easily. It doesn't have to cost the world, and it's not a super expensive kind of shit out. So,
As you're talking about design and what it means to have good design and biophilic design as well, I was just thinking that it sounds like good design just means it's all about how it makes you feel. and how it resonates with you. So yeah, that's really interesting. I never really had that connection before, or made that connection before. So thank you so much for sharing all about green interior design with workspaces at home. We really appreciate it. We will link the book in the show notes. And if our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
Probably you can look at me on LinkedIn. That's maybe the most easiest accessible one. Or there's a profile on the UNSW website as well. So you can have a link for that.
Amazing. Thank you, Iva, for joining us today. We'll link Iva's LinkedIn in the show notes so you can check it out and connect with her if you're interested. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We hope you learned lots, like I have, about sustainable work environments at home, and we'll catch you in the next episode. You've been listening to the Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pe.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.